Hello, hello. Happy Sunday in Lent. It's fine. Off the top of my head, I don't even know which Sunday it is in Lent. And that is actually a good way to start because that tells you everything you need to know about how Lent has been going for me. It's been, this has not been one of my better Lents, I have to admit. So we will get to that in a minute. But I also just saw that today is the anniversary of the death of Saint John Paul the Great, Pope John Paul II. And I want to begin by telling you a quick story about that is always very interesting in my own mind. So back when Pope John Paul II passed away, I was an atheist, and my husband was a kind of non-practicing Christian, a sort of lukewarm Baptist. And so we didn't know anything about Catholicism. I personally was very anti-Catholic. And so when Pope John Paul II passed away, it was, we didn't see that as being relevant to us at all. We didn't see that as, something that was significant to us. But I will never forget, my husband and I were sitting there. We had some news channel. Thank you. Appreciate that comment. Is it Maggie? Magali. Thank you. So we were sitting there. We had the news channels pulled up. We were watching the funeral of John Paul II, and we realized that there are all of these people from all over the world coming to this funeral, and all of these dignitaries. I would later read that it was actually the biggest, something like the biggest collection of dignitaries ever in the world to be in one place. We're at this funeral for Pope John Paul II. So Joe and I watched this news footage. One of the news sites was showing, the Prime Minister of Great Britain walking up, and then I forget who else, but just tons and tons of famous politicians and dignitaries who we had heard of. And I will never forget, my husband turned to me and he said, there's something with this Catholic Church. I can't put my finger on what it is. I don't know exactly what's going on, but there is something to this church, because we say that Catholicism is irrelevant, and he and I did. I mean, we were the type of people who said, it's archaic. Yeah, Allison, I totally agree that the church is archaic and not relevant to today, and like nobody would still want to be Catholic. And so you say that, blah blah blah, all that talking, and then you see the funeral of a pope, and it's like the whole world stops for this funeral. And so I will never forget Joe turning to me and saying, there's something with this Catholic Church. I don't know what it is, but it won't go away. Its leaders have this enormous impact on the entire world. And when a pope dies, everyone stops. The whole world stops to ponder the death of the leader of this church that's supposedly so irrelevant. So I'm going to be thinking about that just on this anniversary of the death of Pope John Paul II. I'm just going to be thinking about what an impact that made on me and my husband, saying, how could we possibly say the Catholic Church is irrelevant when the whole world has stopped to look at this funeral? And by the way, thank you to Cindy, who commented on my Lent lights in the background. We put these up at Christmas, and we liked them, so we kept them. Let me see if you can see there. So so we liked the lights, so we kept them. And in fact, I once tried to make the case to our homeowners association that we had Lent lights, because we had Christmas lights like this up outside of our house, and we didn't take them down by the time Lent rolled around. And so we got a notice from the homeowners association that we had to take them down. And we tried to get a religious exception, and we said, these are Lent lights. It's for Lent. We're Catholic, so obviously, per the tradition of Catholicism, we put these lights around our house, but then we don't light them to symbolize the absence of the light of Christ in the world during Lent. And they didn't believe us at all, and we kept getting letters, and we had to take our Lent lights down. But I want to make that a thing so that we have a little more time, to get our lights down when we put them up at Christmas. Okay, so let's talk about Stations of the Cross, Lent Fails, stuff like that. Let's see. What is on my right? Oh, that is a water bottle that we use to feed the dogs. In a minute, I'll give you the tour of my living room in a minute. You're probably wondering where my 6 kids are too. 3 of them are at a grandparent's house, and the other 3 have been banished upstairs. So they're probably playing Minecraft. So, okay, so Lent Fails. This Lent has not been particularly spiritually inspiring for me. Mainly because, hi Margot, always good to hear from you. Mainly because I've gotten myself too overwhelmed. I do this all the time. I just got back on Friday night from New York. People who follow me on Instagram know that this what do you call it? This just season that I've been in has been crazy. The last time I traveled, I was in Duluth, Minnesota, and I ended up putting the key to my car in the rental car drop box. And then I get back to Austin and I can't get in my car because I've put the key to my car in the rental car drop box. So there was that trip. Then I went to New York. So long story short, I'm having a not spiritually uplifting Lent, and it's my own stupid fault. It's my own fault because I just got myself too overwhelmed. I got myself too maxed out. And so here's where I want to use this story to lead in to what we can learn from I know it totally classic me, to what we can learn from the Stations of the Cross, which is this is very typical of me, to bite off more than I can chew. Very, very typical of me. And I used to freak out about this sort of thing, that I'd think, oh, once again, but here I go, screwing it up once again. Oh, thank you for your prayers when I lost the keys. Yeah, very, very much needed them that day. That was a bad day. So I just say, look at how stupid I am, that I know that I have a tendency to get myself overwhelmed, and I do it anyway. And, I had a great spiritual director at one point say, Jen, you've got to know yourself and accept yourself and laugh at yourself when you do things like this and not make so much of a big deal about it. I think that's actually one of the ways that we can be under spiritual attack during Lent, is to get ourselves really worked up about our failures, about elements of our personality that makes it, more difficult for us to have a prayerful and holy Lent, that, we make a mistake. Let's say you've gotten yourself overbooked. You said that you were going to go to adoration, and then it just didn't happen because you got too busy. Maybe you made some bad choices. Well, we have a tendency then to freak out and to make a big deal out of it, and to say, oh, I'm the worst. There I go again. There's no hope for me. God hates me. Whatever, like to totally freak out. And so it's so important to take a step back and to just say, yeah, that's me. That's who I am. So in my case, it's that I tend to bite off more than I can chew, and I always will. And to accept that about myself, to laugh at myself when I do it again, and just say, yeah, it's honestly not that big of a deal that I do this. And this is something that I'm going to be working on my whole life, and I should, seek good advice. I should seek counsel about it, but I shouldn't freak out. I shouldn't beat myself up about it, and just kind of laugh that this is kind of who God made you to be, and you're struggling with it. So that is how I have addressed the fact that I got too busy. I just sort of said, this is who I am. I tend to do this. This is not the last time I will do it, and I will just work my way out of that state of busyness and just do the best I can to jump back in. And so I really encourage you to think about that in your own life, especially if Lent has not been what you thought that maybe it could be and what you wanted it to be. I really encourage you to just kind of think about that and just accept maybe some of your own personality faults that lead you to maybe not have the perfectly prayerful experience that you wanted to have. And by the way, I really appreciate the likes. I appreciate the shares. This is a great opportunity to introduce people to the Focus Catholic page. So go ahead and share if you'd like to share it on your own personal Facebook page. And maybe we can get to my Adele Gathering Conference in a little bit. But so let's take it to the Stations of the Cross. So I'm very fortunate, since Focus asked me to talk about the Stations of the Cross, that I just had a great author on my radio show, which is on SiriusXM, and this author's name is Gary Jansen. And I am about to really rip off all of his great insights about the Stations of the Cross. It was very fortunate for me that he just came on the show. He has this great book called Station to Station, and it's an Ignatian journey through the Stations of the Cross. And so he says in this that, Letitia Adams is here. This Facebook Live is about to get lit, guys. Be careful. I can't be responsible for anything Letitia Adams says. Like, this is good. You might want, we'll see if we can get a filter to see which comments we allow through here now that Letitia Adams is watching the Facebook Live. So anyway, so Gary Jansen, he has this book called Station to Station, and he was telling us that, yes, and Margarita's recipes will be coming soon. He was telling us that, when you look at the stations of the cross, you see Christ at his most human. This isn't a moment like when he changed water into wine, when he multiplied the loaves and really used his power to perform miracles. You see a deeply human side of Christ as he goes through the stations of the cross, as he walks through these movements. And so this is a great learning experience. Gary Jansen points out, and I think we've got the link to his book in the comments there. This is a great learning experience for us to look at the stations of the cross and then to see how Christ reacts to that suffering. Because, when you think about it, our society has a very tricky, bad relationship with suffering. We fear suffering in this society more than we even fear death. It's what's responsible for abortion, for euthanasia. I mean, we would rather die than suffer. We are terrified of suffering. It's seen as the worst evil. And I think a lot of us, even as Catholics, fall into this. We really see it like a good life is a life that would involve absolutely no suffering at all, ever. And so the stations of the cross are so important so that we can walk through them. Thanks, Juanita. So that we can walk through them, see the suffering, and see how Christ reacts to the suffering. Because when we can start learning from Christ's reactions to suffering, we can start to incorporate that in our own lives, and then we can stop fearing suffering. Because I think that that's one of the ways that we get really, really, really held back as Catholics and in our spiritual life, is because we sort of think, okay, I'm sorry, my son just walked in the room and distracted me. So we sort of think as Catholics, I want to go deeper in my spiritual life. I want to connect with the Lord. I want to turn my life over to God. I mean, you hear this, if you're involved in Focus at all, you hear this all the time. People talking about, I want to take my faith to the next level. I really want to connect with the Lord. I want to be more on fire for Jesus. But then, you know what stops us? Where we stop is when we suddenly say, oh, wait a minute though. A lot of those saints, their lives were like not easy. There was a lot of suffering. They were always like getting sick and dying of tuberculosis and, being persecuted and, being beheaded. Not a good life. And so I really do think that we have this hesitation to go deeper in our spiritual lives because we are terrified of suffering. And if we can get to the point that we can love God more than we fear suffering, I really think that we can take our spiritual lives to a completely new level. And again, I got a lot of this from Gary Jansen in his book, in his book Station to Station. And another thing that he pointed out when we were talking is that suffering can make us focused on ourselves. Suffering can make us focused on ourselves. And that is a dangerous, dangerous thing. And so you see, as you walk through the stations, when Jesus is condemned to death, station 1, he carries his cross, station 2. I'm reading this. I don't have this memorized. Unfortunately, I do not just know the stations off the top of my head. Jesus dies on the cross. So let's take the moment that right before he dies, his concern is for his mother. He is thinking of other people throughout his suffering. And you see how Christ's suffering does not make him focused on himself. He's still focused on other people, on God, on his mother, even at the height of his suffering. And I think that that is so, so key to the spiritual life. To A, not fear suffering. And B, to not let suffering turn us on ourselves. I had an experience where I had something called a deep vein thrombosis. It is a blood clot in a major vein. It was in my leg. It was very bad. And I was in so much pain all the time. I was in a terrible, terrible amount of pain. I could do very little for myself. I couldn't stand up. I couldn't walk. I was truly disabled during this time. And this was when I had just become Catholic, so I really, I didn't really know that much about the spiritual life, and I didn't really know how to handle these sort of things, and I wasn't familiar with the concept of offering it up. And so I'm in pain, and I'm in pain, and I'm in pain. And I became focused on me. I actually noticed, even at the time, that I became almost childlike as I became so consumed by my own suffering. It's all I could think about. All I could think about was this immense suffering that I had gotten into. So I wish at that time I had the Stations of the Cross as a resource. One, because it would remind me how much Christ suffered, and it would remind me to get in that spirit of offering it up, of connecting my sufferings to Christ. But two, it would show me that suffering is actually a time to come out of ourselves. Suffering is actually a time to look out for the people who God is trying to send into our lives to help us. And in fact, you see, I don't know if Letitia Adams is still watching. I think she said she was at a bar when she left a comment earlier, so maybe she doesn't have good connection there. But she has been very public about a tragedy that struck her family. Okay, good. See, Letitia Adams she says, walking through a bar, listening to you talk about suffering. That's welcome to the Jennifer Fulwiler Facebook Live. Father Mike Schmitz is doing the one next Monday. It will be much classier than this. So Letitia, I was just talking about you. So Letitia Adams, you can look her up on Facebook. You should see her name there in the comments. So her family, she's been very open. They just went through a horrific tragedy. And one of the things that you see when you look at something like that, a situation like Letitia's or a similar situation, is that God never asks us to suffer alone. God never asks us to suffer alone. He might allow suffering in our lives, but he will never ask us to suffer alone. Over on my Facebook page, you've got to look up, once this is done, go look up the story I posted yesterday about the chat I had with Mary Lennon. She had a daughter who had very, very severe disabilities, required round-the-clock care, and this daughter passed away just not that long ago, a year or two ago. And so Mary's whole life caring for this daughter involved tremendous sacrifices. One of the things that I hadn't even thought about, but we were talking about, was that she couldn't just go to the grocery store. Think about that. If you have a seriously disabled adult child, and let's say you're home alone, and you realize, let's say you're making a recipe, and you need cream for your recipe. So, oh man, darn it, got to run down to the store. You can't do that if you have an adult disabled child, because Courtney couldn't even operate her own wheelchair, so the wheelchair would have to be pushed. And so Mary Lennon said, and again, you can find her link and everything over on my Facebook page. Mary Lennon said she actually had to, here, this is the great thing about video, I can demonstrate this. She would push her daughter's wheelchair in front of her with one hand, and then on the other hand, she would have to pull the grocery cart. And that's what it took to get to the grocery store. And that is suffering. That's exactly the kind of thing that we fear. Like, oh, that's a hard life. That's a difficult life. But you know what happened? Just like we see in the Stations of the Cross, in the 5th station, when Simon walks up to help the Lord carry his cross, what started happening? When she had to take her daughter to the grocery store, and she had to push her daughter's wheelchair because her daughter was not able to operate her own wheelchair, her daughter was not verbal, and she had to push the cart, is that people started helping her. She started to get to know the young man at the grocery store he would say, here, ma'am, let me help you. And he would push the cart for her. And it was a little awkward. And hey, and I am the world's biggest introvert. Let me tell you, I'm such an introvert. One time, I saw this video, this sci-fi movie about a guy who was just a brain sitting in a jar. Like he was just a brain, but he was alive and he could think and somehow communicate with people. And I thought, what an amazing life. That would be great. I could just be a brain on a shelf. Everybody would leave me alone. So that's how much of an introvert I am. So I have a tendency to, when I suffer, completely turn in on myself, completely block other people out, And then I'll be sitting there and saying, oh, God's not answering my prayers. God's abandoned me. Oh, God. Okay, let's see. Are we still live? Yes. Okay, sorry. We lost connection there for a second. So, okay, so Mary Landenberg's example shows us that it's so easy when we suffer to think that we're suffering alone, like her going to the grocery store with an adult disabled daughter who cannot push her own wheelchair or anything. And then you see that, she could have perceived that she was suffering alone. And then you see the young man at the grocery store coming up and, walking and helping her push her cart. And then you see, she talked about this whole community that came about, this whole community that surrounded her as she helped take care of her adult daughter with disabilities, that she was no longer alone. And that's the thing that's so easy to miss. And especially, again, I was saying before we lost connection that I'm an extreme introvert, extreme introvert. So it's easy for people like me to miss the help that God sends us. It's easy for people like me to miss the fact that, yeah, God might allow us to suffer in our lives, but he never asks us to suffer alone. He will be with us, and very often you will see that he will send other people to be with you as well. Again, I saw this with Letitia Adams, who's watching the video here from a bar, no less, exactly what we'd expect. So you see this with Letitia Adams' recent tragedy. You see it with Mary Landenberg. I have seen it in my own life. We had, after our 6th child was born, he was in the hospital. He was in very bad condition. And I had the body of Christ praying for me, bringing me food, offering us financial assistance, lifting us up. And that was, and it was interesting to compare that tragedy in my life from the time I had the deep vein thrombosis and I was going through so much suffering and, I could hardly move. And then when we had the baby in the hospital, and this time I understood to accept the help that God gives me in the form of other people. And that, again, he might allow us to suffer, but he never asks us to suffer alone. And so I find that particularly inspiring to look at the 5th station. That, yeah, and like Letitia says, that he will always give us people who will give us joy. And again, look her up, follow her story. You'll see that Letitia has some really powerful things to share right now. So I didn't want to go into every single station because there are 14 stations. And, we can kind of get bogged down in just running through, each of the details of each station. What I really encourage you to do is to, first of all, if you're not familiar with the Stations of the Cross, get familiar. Again, Gary Jansen's book, Station to Station, is really, really a good one. I love it. And to look at each station and to look at how Jesus reacts and to consider that we are seeing Jesus here at his most human. This is not where he performs great miracles. He doesn't have an angel come down and pick up the cross and make it go away. We see a deeply human side of Jesus. And then to look at each station about how he reacts. And so this is my little bit of spiritual homework for you. To just think about, pray through the Stations of the Cross. All 14, they were originated when people were not able to go on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. This is like a mental pilgrimage if you can't physically go to the Holy Land and walk the way of the cross. Pray over each station, look at the way Jesus reacts, and say a prayer and ask God to show you the station that you really need to think about in your own life, that teaches you something that you really need to think about. So to give you the example I mentioned earlier, when Simon helps Jesus carry the cross, the 5th station, that was very clear for me that is what the Lord was asking me to pray about. And what I really felt through prayer was God telling me, hey, you know what? A lot of times when you suffer, you turn in on yourself, you start whining about how God's not there to help you, and you feel like you've been abandoned by God. But really, I'm trying to send a Simon to you in your life to help you carry your cross, and you're just not accepting that help that I'm trying to send you because it didn't come in the exact form that you wanted it to be in. So for me, the 5th station was the one that God was like, boom, that's the one. That's the one that you need to hear. And a final thought I want to leave you with is there's this wonderful quote, this beautiful, beautiful quote from Pope Francis, where when he was talking about his vocation and how he kept his faith throughout, everything he's been through in his life, he said, because always, even, and I'm paraphrasing here, but even in my darkest moments, even in moments of sin, even in moments of failure, I have seen Jesus and I have trusted him. And he has not left me alone. Even in moments of sin, even in moments of failure, I have seen Jesus and I have trusted him. And he has not left me alone. And so if you, like me, have maybe not been as prayerful as you should this Lent, maybe you haven't been doing everything that you should do, maybe you feel like your sins are worse this season than they were during ordinary time, just remember that God is still with you, God still loves you, you can still turn to him, and you can still trust him. Even if you're in a moment of failure, even if you are in a moment of sin, you can still turn to Jesus and trust him. And he is always, always with you. So that is the thought that I want to leave you with. You can look me up. I think I tagged myself on the title of this Facebook Live. Come say hello to me on Facebook. You can also find me on Instagram and Twitter. Just search for my name, Jennifer Fulwiler. I would love to connect with you there. So, and you can find my radio show. I'm on the SiriusXM network. And I want to let you know that Father Mike Schmitz will do the final Facebook Live, and that will be Monday, April 10th at 3 p.m. Eastern. So that's a little bit different time than we've been doing that. That is Father Mike Schmitz, Monday, April 10th, 3 p.m. East. I've got this written down so I didn't mess it up. So be sure to check that out. Obviously, we all love Father Mike Schmitz. He's fantastic. So that will be amazing. Monday, April 10th will be the final Facebook Live in this series. So love you guys. Really appreciate you being here. And again, remember, you can always turn to God, even in moments of failure, even in moments of sin. He still loves you. You can still trust him. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your Lent. God bless you guys.